And just a frame of reference, we're only going to cover up to and including the 4th season. So we'll also only include up to the 4th book. So for those of you that have read beyond the 4th book, which is Drums of Autumn. So if you've gone Fiery Cross and beyond, no spoiler alerts.
Who has though? Oh, okay. Okay.
Has anybody started the series, gone into the series yet to start reading it? Oh, but watching it.
Yeah.
I was told to, at the very least, read or listen to the audiobook of the 3rd one in the series.
Okay.
This is an opinion that you got there. Yeah.
And for how many of you, what came first, the book or the show? The book?
Book.
Sort of both. I heard about the show, but didn't have the channel, so I read the books instead.
Okay.
I watched the show first.
First and then
read the book to compare.
So, I mean,
We're back.
and we're back. Yeah.
Thanks, Adrienne.
Well, when we started researching kind of our topic, and what we pose this as is how does this show with its strong female leads and characters coming into this, how does it really reflect in society of what's going on in society? And I was amazed by how many articles were out there that really discussed so much of this. And what our research brought us to was a couple of different viewpoints, and that's kind of what we are stemming a lot of this conversation off of. Helen started with one.
Yeah, so with our research, we wanted, before we started to get the audience's opinion, we wanted to know what people out in the media were saying. And so the topic of feminism was just unrelenting, and you really couldn't dismiss it at all. And the thing that was so interesting about it was a lot of the stuff that was written either was pro-feminist, like this is the show that finally depicts a woman who has a voice and uses it. And then there were some people who were just like, it's just another show of the woman in perils. I know what I think about it, I know what you think about it, but to see such a different take from all of the things that we read and wanted to get information on, it was really interesting. And in particular, I had found an article by Roxane Gay, who most people know is a really famous essayist, feminist essayist. And the title of it is Outlander is Back, and as a feminist, I am conflicted. And I was conflicted reading it, because a lot of the stuff that she talks about is the victim role that Claire plays. But at the same time, I think Roxane makes a mistake because, for example, she brings up season 1, episode 9, in which Claire gets a beating from her new husband. And she's really offended by this scene. But then she ends the paragraph saying, but if it's Jamie Fraser beating me, I guess I wouldn't mind. So I'm like, so I agree with you, but at the same time, like, you can't be that angry about it. And so, I also think it's unfair because a lot of this discussion is based off of the first season. As we see it progress, especially into the 4th, we have more female characters. We have more instances where a voice for that demographic is really, really, really resonates in different situations. So let me just give you an example of one of the things that we had talked about. Should we go down or?
We should probably go
first, and
let's
then we'll
go
to that. Okay.
Well, and one of the other points of view that I had taken, and this is a newer one. Helen was saying that a lot of things came from the first season, reactions towards the first season, and people just jumping into the book. But just recently, as in less than a month ago, a comment came out on Twitter that Netflix put out because the first 2 seasons of Outlander are going to be on Netflix, which is a big thing. It's a less expensive subscription service than having a Starz subscription or having a cable subscription. and or having to wait forever to get it on DVD, and in the interlibrary loan world, just being patient for it. And the comment that was made was, moms, hold on, Outlander is coming to Netflix. And I'm a mom, but I was also very offended by that because I don't feel like this is kind of like the mom show. I feel like there's a lot more going on here than just a titillating occurrence of
Right.
romance and the male gaze, which we're going to talk to in one of our cornerstones. And I felt like this is something I kind of wanted to sit and prove to people. This isn't your mama's show.
Well, and,
We have a question from the
oh,
audience.
go on.
I was just going to add that I have a friend who is very much so a history buff, and he descends from the Highlands of Scotland. And although he says, yes, there are historical inaccuracies within the book, it's a work of fiction. It's not meant to be exactly representative. Still a fan of the show, and he's kind of a mountain man. He's like 6'4", big bushy beard. Not
Not to stereotype.
Right, not to stereotype.
Yeah.
But it's not a show that's only for one group of people.
I agree.
No. And then
Or the
you
series.
got into it because both of your parents were watching it, right? And then
Yeah, well, I didn't know that both of my parents were watching it. And they said, hey, wow, there's this show on called Outlander. And I'm like, please tell me you didn't see the wedding yet. And they're just like, yeah. And I'm like, okay, we can't watch this together. Because they're still my mom and dad. But it's funny because we can kind of chat about it. And it's, my 60-year-old parents who are watching the show and are just as captivated by the characterization and by the history of it and everything. And I was very similar to Sarah, and I'm sorry, I don't know your Margaret. I did the same thing. I heard about the show, and then my coworker said, oh yeah, I read that book a while ago. I mean, the book came out in 1985. I don't know if a lot of you know that. The first book came out in 1985. So 30 some years later, we're watching this show, and I feel like 30 years ago, a book was written with, such intensity and such a strong female character, and now we're watching a show about it. But I did the same thing. And then I started reading it, and then I couldn't put it down.
yeah.
But then I started realizing how important it was for me to keep with the season, and I know that was with Helen too. And our goal this year, this summer, is to read The Fiery Cross before the 5th season comes out. So that being said, before we get into our 4 kind of like main talking points, is that we're not going beyond season 4, but we are going to be talking about season 4. So if you are watching the show and you haven't finished season 4, there are going to be spoilers.
Yeah.
And if you've read and you haven't finished reading the book, there are going to be spoilers. So I just want to put it out there. So just don't feel. But one of our first.
I'm just wondering what it's all about.
Oh, you're completely new to it, huh?
Yeah. I
Okay.
caught like an episode here and there.
Okay. So this is another complication, though, is kind of getting people interested in it, because when somebody asks what the story is about, what do we say? We talk about it's a woman who is living in the 1940s with her husband. She is a nurse who just got out of World War
She was stationed in Paris.
Right. And so they're on a vacation in the Scottish Highlands, and she finds...
Her husband's a historian who's going to be starting at Oxford.
Yes.
Mm-hmm.
So she goes collecting for herbs.
Yes.
She finds a circle of stones, Craignadoon, and accidentally puts her hands up against it and falls through the stones 200 years back in time.
Oh, I thought so, okay.
Yeah.
Oh, good.
So, I mean, that's just giving you where it starts, but I think it's so minuscule in the grand scheme of what the show is about.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah, so there is there is a little suspension of belief, because it essentially is a a fantasy, or I guess maybe science fiction because it's time travel. So there's
Speculative fiction, we might say. Mm-hmm.
I was gathering that he was unstuck in time somehow, that switching between two time periods.
nope,
Okay.
not at all. Unstuck. He is
travel.
there. He cannot travel. He's never attempted to travel,
Well,
He doesn't feel anything.
Yeah, he doesn't hear
but he doesn't have the vibrations.
right, so there's only a select
Feel the
few
vibrations.
type of people who can go through. Yeah, and then what transpires after that happens is
Okay.
pretty crazy.
Yeah. So some of the things, and we feel, I mean, obviously we've kind of set the precedent already. If people have questions or want to make a comment, please don't hesitate because I think that can facilitate a really good discussion as well. But we wanted to talk about the feminist viewpoint. We also, in many of our articles that we researched, there was kind of the concept of the male gaze versus the female gaze when you're talking about a romance, especially as visual as this. And then also one of the topics that we found to have some sort of effect on us is the portrayal of the marginalized within the show throughout the series. So with that being said, feminism is a present. Let's just take a real quick trip.
You're an exceptional woman.
You do not get to be more angry than me.
Christ.
Tell Fergus, I'll not be cast aside.
If you want to get rid of him, I can take him out back.
If I wanted him shot, I'd do it myself. Truth be told, I never liked you.
You'll no encounter many ladies like my Auntie Claire. I heard her speak words fit to make a sailor blush.
One of the many qualities of my wife that I cherish.
I thought that was, we thought that was perfect.
Especially since it's not just all about Claire anymore.
It really isn't. As we've kind of gone through the series, of course, Claire establishing herself as this really modern woman, and even in the 1940s, but going back to 1743 Scotland, where there were no women's rights, and women's rights were really just kind of beginning where she came from. She really knew who she was, and she established herself during a time in Scotland where, you know, being a doctor, even being a doctor in the 50s was being ridiculous, but her being a healer in 1700 Scotland was very common because that's what women were, except she was a witch.
Well, yeah, no, we'll like take your service and we might burn you afterwards.
Right, correct,
Yeah,
yes.
yeah.
I think one of the things that we found also very interesting is the other characters, her quote-unquote sister-in-law, Jenny.
Yeah.
She's feisty as all get out.
Right. It's not just.
It's not just.
It's not. I mean, that's. Okay, go on.
Go on.
Yeah.
But Brianna, of course. Well, Brianna, we all know who she is, correct? Okay, spoilers. Brianna is Claire and Jamie's daughter. Sorry. But you'll get there. And even, you know, being raised by her mother and her, you know, who she thought was her father, or who raised her as, you know, his own. She came over running after her mother to save her. I think that
On her own. And she was, in some ways, I don't want to say punished for it, but you know, she had to deal with her own struggles doing that.
which we'll talk about
We
later for
will.
sure. And then, of course, Jocasta, the aunt, who creates a really interesting relationship with Murtaugh. And then Gellis, who is the witch, really.
She's the main witch.
She's the main witch.
She's the top witch.
Literal or metaphorical?
Literal.
Yes.
Both.
Yes.
Yeah, both.
Yes.
Both.
Yes.
She utilized her ability to pass through the stones, but also kind of her prowess and her foresight to really manipulate a lot of people.
She truly is dangerous, though.
She is dangerous.
You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Like, Yeah.
But she got her way. She got her way.
She wasn't the most sane though.
No.
But
I don't think feminism is present because there are historical precedents for strong women, even 100 years before the Outlander series. You have Queen Elizabeth I. You have Mary, Queen of the Scots. You have the Queens of Spain. For Claire, in our times, you have Marie Curie in the fields of science. The women of those times had to be level-headed and strong, not only because of competing in a male's world, but just a product of their time, because they did have the intelligence and know how to use it. Even in the time period of the 1715 uprising and the 45, Highland women were considered very strong, even in a position of power for the lairds of the clans, because they knew all the secrets that was going on behind the scenes.
so you're saying though that you don't think that there's feminism
I
present?
feel like everything you just said had a feminist point of view.
Right.
It's not, to me, I don't feel it as a point of view, I feel it as a fact. That was a part of their life. And if you look at the lives of regular Highland women, look what they had to do day to day. They had to manage everything that was going on in the household, besides the farming going on that might have been happening. They had to look after their men, the children, what was going on physically inside the household.
But those are facts. Those are facts. But how you're portraying it, I think, is inherently feminist. Not that it's how they led themselves and depicted themselves and how they were depicted in history that I think is essentially feminist.
Or maybe not what we know as modern feminism.
Well, no,
No, true.
it's not, you know, and when you're talking about it within the realm of the show, within the realm of the series though, there are moments when, I mean, we're talking about a strong female character here. We're talking about Claire, right? But there are limits to what she's allowed to do. And I think it's the way that she handles it is what we're trying to debate here. Whether or not that you see the way that she handles these situations as a feminist, as somebody who we would look at today and say, yeah, I do that the exact same way. Or that you'd look at and be like, oh, she had to do that because it's 17, whatever.
Well, and I think what we're not paying attention to is the relationship that she had with her husband really kind of,
Which one?
we're gonna go with Jamie. I think the relationship that she had with Jamie, I think really defined and brought out that it is a feminist point of view, that there is a strong female character present because he allowed her to be in a way that you're saying all these things that women had to do, but we still see scenes and we still read parts of the book where, but a man would beat her. I mean, Jamie decided after giving her that spanking that she deserved it, but that's because that's what he knew his father to do to his mother, and that's what he knew other men in his clan to do to their wives, and he knew no different, but then he realized after he did it that she shouldn't be treated like a piece of cattle. That really, he didn't want to do it, he felt horrible doing it, and I feel like that is a really feminist point of view too.
So more of a product of the times?
Well, yeah, I think knowing a product of their upbringing, a product of the times.
But also a product of character.
Yes.
I
Because,
was just gonna say, the way Claire is coming out as her character, is it more the way Jamie is acting towards her, or is it more Claire acting towards
that,
Jamie?
you pose a wonderful
Yeah.
point there. Because, you know, when we're thinking about them as a couple, you don't have one strong character and then one weak character.
Mhm.
They're like a dual, like they're both forces to be reckoned with. So the thing is, in that situation, you could have two butting heads very easily. But if you want to go back to the scene where she is talking about after she's been spanked by her husband, once he realizes the reason why she was running away from him, he could have easily just said, well, this is what it's done, this is how we do it, this is how my dad did it. He's a strong character as well to say, I'm not going to do it this way anymore. Like, I trust you enough. I trust who you are and you know what you do, then I'm going to change what I know.
Mhm.
I don't think that we could consider her strong of a female to have that role if she wasn't counterparted with somebody as strong as he is either.
True. I mean, that's not to say that he still doesn't get frustrated by, I think especially in, you know, when they're in Paris and when she wants to help at the hospital, even when she shouldn't be, when she, you know, is in a very delicate situation, or, you know, there was the scene there where she, you know, is attempted rape, and even after that, he still kind of lets her, he still remains protective, but still gives her the ability to go out and kind of do her own thing. So he gets frustrated with it, and she's gonna do it no matter what. She's gonna, you know.
And I think that's the thing, understanding that, allowing her to be that way instead of just keeping that reinforcement of that, you know, male role. Like,
Right.
no, you're going to listen to me, especially when they're constantly surrounded by his clan of men. You know, he's worried about how he's gonna look at that, they're gonna look at him as well.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, and I think one of the things also that we encountered when we were doing our research and just having these discussions is that a lot of people were just like, oh, he's so chivalrous, he's so courageous, look at how protective he is over her. But they didn't praise enough of how Claire kind of wielded through all these hardships that she had, and how she was just able to kind of survive and go through and still be a stronger person afterwards. I just think, you know, she carving out a place for herself in the 18th century when women were subjugated. I mean, even though you're saying, you know, they had to do that, well, yeah, they had to, because men were literally fighting for their rights. So yeah, they had to. They're not gonna, you know, abandon their children. They had to do what they had to do to take care of their families.
Yeah.
But I don't know.
He's just I mean, I think a lot of what makes her so admirable is the way that he accepts her. And I don't think we can disregard how important his role is. Virtue is an issue that I think comes up a lot, not just in the first, but in this past season. Spoiler, like, there's another rape scene. And Jamie basically reprimands his daughter because he doesn't understand the situation that brought her to that. Her virtue is a big deal, a really, really big deal. But in the first season, when Jamie is presented with the idea of having to marry Claire, she asks him right away, does it bother you that I'm not a virgin? And I don't know if anybody remembers what he answered. Just so long as it doesn't bother you that I am, you know? So I don't know if that was just like a male really liking the looks of his female and not caring, but
She was very hungover in that wedding dress. Do you remember that? Poor girl. Feel her.
Yeah, so then we have those issues regarding motherhood and being a daughter. Things are different when you're looked at as the woman that I want to marry, and then looked at as, you know, part of my kin. What you're expected to do and what you're not expected to do.
I know that you, Helen, had a lot of articles and research, especially because season 4 is so fresh in your mind about the contemporary topics that we think are contemporary, but, you know, again, we're talking about books that were written years ago, and even though the strong things that are happening now and the strong opinions that are happening now.
A lot of it is, you know, this, I think for everybody who's seen season 4, I noticed that this season has definitely strayed from the book more than I had ever noticed. And not in a bad way. It actually worked. I wasn't angry. They kept it really, really interesting. But some of the things that were taken on, abortion is brought up twice in the book. It's only kind of glanced over in Drums of Autumn, or how Jamie calls it, flipping the baron. So there are two women who have to be confronted with the possibility of abortion. One who actually dies from that happening. I think her name is Lissa. She is Lissa Garver. She had her abortion performed by another slave named Pollyann, and Jamie and Claire, being as amazing as they are and so ahead of their time, for the sake of Pollyann, the woman who performed the abortion, get her away so she isn't punished for what had happened. And it's a little bit of foreshadowing, because then we have to deal with Brianna's pregnancy. And
that we don't necessarily quite know what the origins
right.
are of it.
And that whole situation is just awful. But a lot of it brings up more of the issues in terms of their roles, because you have Brianna who is in a situation where she's not sure who her father is, the father of her child is. And that could basically be something really detrimental to her whole well-being. But the way that it came about is what she was doing was she had a duty to her mother. And her exchange of sex for her mother's ring is what got her in this precarious position. And then it puts Claire in a horrible position, because as her mother and as a surgeon, she wants to give her daughter that choice. Her daughter, who's from the 1960s now,
Right.
who she doesn't want stuck in this time period. But what can you do? She's well aware that one slip of the hand, and I could kill my daughter. But if I don't do this, and I don't give her that choice, I'm jailing my daughter. She's going to be stuck.
She's going to be stuck with that forever.
Right, not just stuck with this child that she doesn't know who's the father, but also stuck in a time period that wasn't meant for her. And to think about that, along with having to approach her husband with the news that his daughter's virtue has been taken away from her.
Well, and really, think about what that does to Jamie, though, and think of the emotions that kind of strikes in Jamie, considering what happened to him in the first book.
Yeah, can we talk about that?
Does anybody not want to talk about that? Is anybody feeling comfortable? Are we feeling a little meh about this? I just think, just because the repeating theme, I guess the lost virtue, and then just being violated, Jamie is essentially violated by her, by his daughter's, what she knows to be her father's.
This is very confusing for
It is very confusing for people who don't know. So not only does she go back into 1743 Scotland, but she encounters a man who looks almost exactly like her husband, and turns out to be her husband's seven times?
5 or 7.
5 or 7
Yeah.
times great-grandfather.
And he's horrible.
And he's horrible.
He's the worst human being possible.
And he rapes Jamie.
So this brings Jamie into the discussion of what to do with Brianna and giving her that choice. When the argument arises between Jamie and Claire, as Jamie just thinks it's preposterous that his wife would even consider doing this to their daughter, Claire says something pretty profound. She says, I know what it is to bear a child. I know what it is to have your body and your mind and your soul taken from you and changed without your will. I know what it is to be ripped out of the place you thought was yours, to have choice taken from you. And then she directly asks her husband, you know what I don't, what it's like to live with the knowledge of violation. Do you mean to tell me that if I could have cut that from you after Wentworth, you wouldn't have had me do it, no matter what the risks? So if you recall, at Wentworth, when he was violated by Blackjack Randall, it wasn't just a physical thing. He was deeply, deeply affected by it, well into season 2. In
The smell, just olfactory, the smell of lavender. He can't handle the smell of
No.
lavender.
Yeah, and I think it's an amazing way. There's some, I don't think these books are perfect. I know probably it's crazy that I'm here saying that, but I don't. I don't think everything is handled well in this. But when it comes to this topic here, I think Diana Gabaldon did a profound job in leaving this type of argument between the father and the daughter. Because we're so used to having women have to relate on this level of violation. And here you have this strong character who says, I know what it's like to have part of your soul taken away. His concern was whether or not his daughter knew the man that raped her. And Claire didn't understand what the significance was. But the significance was he was worried about his daughter having part of her soul taken out of her. Because if you know someone, it changes everything. And how are you to know that unless it's happened to you? Claire's come close to it.
Yeah.
But she didn't actually have it happen. And didn't have it happen repeatedly.
Right. Does anybody else want to kind of comment or talk about kind of a couple of issues that we brought up before we move on to our next kind of cornerstone?
Yeah. We're good? Oh, go on.
It's
Go on.
I guess I could just add the kind of olfactory sense of associating a certain smell with a bad situation.
Yeah.
Probably the only time that I've ever gotten drunk, it was in part due to a maple whiskey, and there was lots of vomiting that followed.
But you will never
breakfast
eat
is my
syrup
favorite meal of
again.
the day. And I love breakfast food. That's the only thing I
You're Ron Burgundy, basically.
And I couldn't eat anything that had maple syrup for years.
See?
Duly
It's-
noted.
Yeah. Yeah. And that's not that bad.
No.
No, well, lavender is lovely.
You're right.
Lovely, but if it's been used, anything
Right.
lovely used in a violating
Horrible
way
way.
is gonna change everything about it.
Well, before we, or what will lead us into our next
I'm a nurse,
discussion point.
not a wet nurse.
And this would be
A trollop. You, fetch me a long piece of cloth or a belt.
Fetch me, she said.
Come on, you goddamn bloody bastard.
You've never had a woman nuisance language in my life, huh?
Again, for a woman, you do ask a fair amount of questions.
So I've been told.
You.
Now I have your attention. I'll keep my mouth shut.
You reached the bosses, I expect.
That's who I am.
I'm speaking and you can talk when I'm finished.
You drink whiskey.
I've been known to have a glass or two.
You've been drinking. I just smell like pus.
Well, that's the pot calling the kettle black. I believe your left hand gets jealous of your right. You're not the meek and obedient type. I'm gonna make you...
Didn't think anyone would ever make that mistake, Sassenach. I'm not sure who's punishing who. And you're a witty one. Come and have a seat here next to me, lass.
No, thank you. I'll stand.
Oh, yeah. No, wait. We'll just pause right there. Because the next topic that we're gonna go into is the male gaze. When we talk about the male gaze, we really talk about how females and males are sexualized or portrayed within this show. And I think we kind of came up with the idea that there's really three perspectives. First of all, you know, the male gaze is the point of view of the male, what they're seeing. And I think a lot of shows, especially shows that have more, what's the what's the word I'm looking for? Like Game of Thrones. I think a lot of the situations that are being depicted in there are definitely through the point of view of the male. It's a very sexualized version of what would happen. And that's not to say that this doesn't happen in this show. I think because women are looked at as helpless prey within this show, there are moments, so it kind of defies the feminism point of view that we're talking about, but they are looked up as helpless prey. They're also looked at as a good time, I guess.
Well, or they're looking to have a good time.
Or they're
depending
looking
on
who you're talking
Yeah.
about. So it's almost the female having the male gaze. When you're talking about Brianna, who just wanted to be with Roger, and Roger's like, no, not till we're married and not till this. And she's like, oh, like, really? It's the 70s, you know? And then also the male gaze that's placed on Jamie, not just through the female's point of view, but also through men, because obviously men are falling in love with Jamie too. Blackjack.
Lord John Grey, my personal favorite.
Your personal fave. I should probably watch you to the day I die, says Lord John Grey.
Which is just the most wonderful relationship, because you have to be a secure male to have gone through what he has gone through and knowingly understands what Lord John Grey's friendship is. For those of you that don't know, he's just, he was the keeper of Ainsworth Jail?
Yes.
Like Ardsmuir?
Ardsmuir.
Thank you. And he falls in love with Jamie, and their friendship is something that lasts.
Well, it saves Jamie, but it's going to continue because Jamie sires the offspring that he adopts. Okay, yeah. There's just so much going on in those. But even just the men in the jail. I mean, he was McDobe. Everybody loved him, you know, like they followed him and they pledged their troth, so to speak, to him. And I mean, even Murtaugh, the loyalty that he has as he comes back. So I feel like, and then we also hit this creepster with Claire in the red dress. Yeah.
This was one of like my favorite but really pivotal scenes, because this is this Monsignor Duvernay. That's his name. Yes. So he sees Claire in this very iconic red dress that reveals more than needs to be revealed, especially for the time period.
Sexuality was different back then.
Very,
Correct.
but we're also
it was
in Paris.
where you were in Paris.
Paris.
Well, Paris is different for a number of
Correct.
reasons.
Right.
But, and all this occurred before a change of thinking, before the Victorian era. And yeah, it was a totally different frame of life.
Yeah. So with Monsieur Duvernay, this is a really hilarious scene if anybody has seen it. He kind of ravishes her in this comedic way. And he's caught by Jamie as he's trying to suckle her feet. And when her husband sees that, he just shoves him into this running stream and comes out totally fine with it. He got a little taste, he's good. You know, there's nothing serious happening. He's just gonna move on to the next pretty woman. So it's interesting to see such a difference. I don't know many shows or series that take on this playfulness with gender roles. And that's what I feel like is happening throughout the entire thing. But even if we go back to Lord John Grey, I was really upset that it was dismissed from the show. But when he is commissioned to care for Jamie's illegitimate son, he offers his body to Lord John Grey. This is someone who has been violated and who has said, my soul has been taken away from this man. We're talking about a heterosexual male. And with the knowledge that Lord John Grey will look after his son, he offers himself to him. And it's a really tender moment in the books that was so special. Lord John Grey denies it because he knows that this isn't in Jamie's heart. But they kiss. They do have a kissing scene. And I was upset that that wasn't put in the series. Because I think it's important to know, like, it said a lot about his character, that no matter how damaged that he was, he'd still be willing to forsake his integrity or, you know, his heart for his offspring that he'll never be able to acknowledge as his own. And I think, you know, we talk about this gorgeous character and, you know, this image of perfection, like in terms of masculinity, but I think it's traits like this that have us falling in love with him. Because I've never seen a character like that.
No, absolutely. And I think people are probably uncomfortable too, and maybe part of it is leaving that part out in the show because it wanted to still capture the audience that it was having, and maybe that would have felt too close, too uncomfortable. Some could
Possibly.
argue, I don't know.
Well, there's a lot of stuff that had to be changed up
Yes.
from the books, because as you discussed, stuff that this was started in the 80s, written through the 90s, I believe.
Mm-hmm.
And you know, we're in, I'm sorry?
She's still writing.
Well, the
Yeah,
ninth, she just, you know, she committed to doing the 9th book. So.
Yeah, so I mean, there are, you know, themes that really have to be looked at and rewritten if you're going to make a production out of something. You know, there's just too strong of a movement now. People have to be very careful when it comes to what type of content they're using and how they're putting it out there. And I think we've seen a lot of that in season 3 and 2 and 4
and 4.
Yeah,
For sure.
I thought they did have that conversation in the show though, they just didn't kiss.
they did. Yeah, they had the conversation. Yeah, just no kid. I wanted the kiss.
The red dress.
Shows everything.
Yeah.
Everything.
Wasn't she pregnant
Yeah.
in this dress? Yeah, I think she was. And then this takes us to the female gaze. Kind of, are we good? Do we see kind of both sides of that story? And then it takes us to the female gaze. And a lot of these really differs on the portrayal of women in other shows. And I think that's why it makes it so successful. I think,
Yeah. This,
no, you go.
Oh, no, well, you know, we were talking about how we got into it. The way that I got into it is my mother was watching the show and she was just like, I need you to watch something. And I was like, I don't even know what the show's like. It was the wedding episode, which is what, like 6 or 7 in? So
Yeah.
it was a few episodes in. I was like, you want me to watch some I don't understand. So I popped it on and I was like, oh my God, what is she watching? You know?
I can't watch this with my mom.
Right, but there was something significant about the wedding episode.
Yes.
And that's, I think, it didn't just reach us because they were gorgeous people and, you know, it was a really romantic type of deal. Because it wasn't. It wasn't romantic. So that's one thing we kind of were interested in, finding out why it was so successful and what was so different about it compared to
Like Game of Thrones.
Game of Thrones. Just,
Yeah.
weddings on that show are nothing. No.
We probably shouldn't compare that wedding to the wedding, the red wedding. But I think one of the things in one of the articles that we found recently, and I think it really, we had to share it because it really spoke to us, is it speaks to kind of the creator, Ron Moore, said, who also created Battlestar Galactica. And Star Trek, he says that all sex scenes must serve a purpose for the story's sake. So that was really kind of how he runs things. And Katrina Balfe actually says if you're gonna show sex, it has to something about the relationship. She refers to Ron, has always been so adamant about that we were not going to do sex for sex's sake, that it was always going to be for a reason, and I love him for that. He kept his word, and it's so important. And enough people do that. And I think it was really interesting because most of you can go online and you can see, you know, Outlander, sexiest scenes. And there's an article out there that actually talks about how women were the directors of those scenes. So most of these things were through the viewpoint of a female.
Well, and it's great because there were parts of it that I think were extremely relatable. Like, I don't know, I can't speak for all women, but the idea of just being thrown in with some random man I met and having to consummate a marriage is terrifying. It's absolutely terrifying.
So there was whiskey.
Right, there was
And there was
whiskey,
headbutting.
and there was conversation. And that kind of softened that blow of how traumatic that could be. You know, you forget that it's an arranged marriage and it's a marriage of necessity.
And it's essentially to save her.
Exactly. Yeah.
So we have kind of this interesting point of view that I think a lot of shows and really don't portray. I think a lot of things out there are violent, are through the male point of view, are looked at females as objects. And we're looking at this fellow right here. And I think one of the things is we're seeing this picture, and we probably see that picture and think of it just as sexy as him with, you know, jumping out of the ravine just a couple of slides ago. Just because we know, because we're looking past that, but we're also looking into how he treats his wife and how he takes care of things. It's a really, and then you see again also, you know, Roger and Brianna, and Roger, how respectful he is of Brianna and the choices that she's making, but still he wants to save her. So there's just kind of an interesting point of view that we're seeing with those
Being saved.
being saved. Speaking of being saved, yeah, since we only have a few minutes left, we can kind of discuss how the marginalized in this show are portrayed, not just female, male, people brought up in different backgrounds, and just, I think the Mr. Willoughby character is kind of interesting too, but.
I was very, do we all remember Mr. Willoughby? I was very curious to see how they would depict him on the show.
On the show.
Because I took offense to how he was portrayed in the books. You have this Chinese that they're describing, and from Edinburgh to Jamaica, he's wearing his blue silk, and he is depicted as a pervert among men on a boat. You know, like if men on a boat think you're a pervert, that's pretty bad. So I was happy to see in season 3 that they didn't turn into a spectacle. He wasn't a caricature. He had a story.
He did have a story.
He did have a story. He wasn't wearing blue silk, thank God. And I think it's really important to see that you can still have an understanding of the literature, but it needs to be handled according to the time. And we're not just talking about the content of the book, but we're talking about it from taking it to book to screen.
Mm-hmm.
You need to be very aware of your audience. You need to be very aware of what type of implications these characters can get. So, yeah, Mr. Willoughby, I don't think he was as pivotal. He didn't have a role as large in the shows, but I think they, the process of not making him such a commodity and just you know, something playful as the comedic aspect of that season was really, really important. And I was pleased with that. And that happened with a few other people too.
Yeah. Ulysses. Mary Hawkins. So just, I feel like the show, I think the book does a really great job of bringing in characters from different points of view, but I think the show does a really amazing job of bringing those characters to life.
To life, yeah, in a way that is relatable, in a way that we can, yeah.
In this time period.
Mm-hmm. I mean, a lot of that, you know, you're thinking about just the events that are going on today. And when you look at season 4 and you look at just the treatment of Ulysses, he was born free. He spoke English, he spoke French, he read it and he wrote it. And as Brianna had put it, his whole life was devoted to the needs of somebody else. I mean, that still goes on today. Mm-hmm. So sometimes I'm watching, I'm wondering if the way that they treat these characters is a commentary on what's going on today. I don't want to get too political because that, you know, but yeah, just the handling of it. And yeah.
As we start to kind of wrap up, do we see the strength of this show continuing? Do we think that it's you know, the time period, our Droughtlander, as they call it?
I didn't hear you say that word.
Droughtlander,
Adorable.
yeah. They call it Droughtlander, the time period in between seasons. Get it? Yeah. And just kind of waiting for things to start, waiting for things to continue. Even looking on social media, I think you and I both shared it that day. I think it was like one day I shared that it was Jamie's birthday, and then like the next day you shared that it was Jamie's, like he's real. Sam Hewen's birthday. And then a couple days later they started with filming and reading the script for table reads for season 5. So it's kind of like we're sitting there waiting for it to happen, and you know, I haven't read the 5th book. We have this goal to read the 5th book. What is it that just keeps maintaining this interest? Why is this show set apart? Is it all the things that we talked about, or is there something more to it that really makes us want to continue to see this show that kind of hooks fans in, you know, or people didn't even realize they were fans?
And some people have lost interest. So
I do know a few people who have lost interest because they think they're not portraying it in a feminist viewpoint.
No, they think it's a lot of it is disappointing.
Yeah.
And a lot of people have, you know, opposite feelings towards it. They want it to be just like the books, which is impossible because the books are 5 million pages long. But,
correct.
My husband was watching it with me, but he dropped out at the last scene in season 1.
What?
When Jamie is raped.
Oh, that's uncomfortable.
That was over the top for him. He said, I can't watch this anymore. But I think it's so fascinating because the characters are so well drawn and it's so interesting. It touches on so many topics, so many aspects of life. And as you talked about feminism, I think that portrayal of women in this series and these books is just amazing.
Yeah.
And there's so much going on. It's so dense. It's just
So
when
dense.
you watch something that's really interesting and you're on to the next thing. You know, it's just amazing how complicated the stories are, about how interesting they are. I'm just starting to read the Fiery Cross, but it's so huge.
Oh, I know.
I know, but we've gotten through them all before. You know, we'll do it again.
If you can get through the 2nd book, I feel like you can do anything.
Yes.
They just get longer though, so.
They do get longer, but that whole Jacobite War thing, I was just like, oh my god, I know I gotta get through this to get to the 3rd one, but.
There's a couple of the books were kind of boring.
Really?
Yeah.
Like later on?
Yeah.
Really?
Yeah.
It was like really hard to get. I had to like make myself read 100 pages a day.
Really?
Otherwise I was just not gonna.
I'm worried.
And honestly, I was disappointed with the last season. I didn't.
Were
think
you?
Yeah, it's because it just strayed from the book so much. I mean,
It did.
I have a job where I watch a lot of TV on my phone, so I mean, I continue to watch it, but I was like, God, I was like, hurry up and do this or whatever. So I don't want to spoil anything because all books run together in
Right.
anyway. But
Yeah,
like,
that does
I just
end up
wonder
happening.
going forward if they're gonna give those characters there on the screen, like if they're gonna do them justice, like
Yeah.
they did in the book.
That's
You're
a
gonna
great-
get the true story behind them.
That's a great
Yeah.
viewpoint.
Diana and I think Ron Moore learned from Galactica to have a good series to be character driven.
Yeah.
And I believe with all of the characters here, they make you feel part of the clan. And to address the lady about the Jacobite Rebellion, that was Scotland's pretty much civil war.
Mm-hmm.
You had clans that were loyal to the Highlands
Mhm.
and clans that were loyal to
So
the crown.
Right.
And it just tore the clans apart at that time.
Mhm.
And unfortunately, they were defeated and the clans were dispersed. Very bad time in Scottish history, but it's very pivotal to see what happens to Jamie and Claire as they progress from Scotland to their travels throughout the rest of the series, and eventually coming to America.
Yeah.
No, I
So-
agree.
Yeah, it makes you feel part of the clan.
And that's where I guess I'm more of the romance than the historical fiction person. You know,
I disagree.
yeah,
Yeah, but that's good.
yeah.
That's good. Yeah.
Is each season with a book?
Yes.
Yeah.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Pretty much.
Each book is the fiery cross?
Right,
Yes.
and the 5th season is being filmed now, so,
Mhm.
yeah.
And do you think we'll see, I'm only on the 3rd season, but I know Claire time travels. Would there be any other characters?
Yeah.
So you want spoilers?
You want to know? We mentioned it, and I think you came in a little bit late. We did let people know that we would have spoiler alerts
Yeah.
because we are covering and including the 4th season in the Drums of Autumn book. Yes, so Claire goes back to Scotland, 20 years later, and then her daughter is also able to travel too.
Well,
Gellis. Well, but Gellis did that.
Because he's a
Roger.
descendant of Gellis. we
Right.
found out,
Yeah.
Yeah, there are other people.
That's fascinating to me,
It is fascinating, like I
I
just want to
feel like
touch some
it's-
stones and see, I just want to see.
But I feel like when you watch this and you read this, it's just kind of like, oh, right, she went through the rocks. But anyway, let's get to the real
It's such
story.
like minute detail.
I feel like
of
it is, but you really have to suspend your belief because the whole reason the show happened is because time travel was available.
I
through-
know,
through
I
shows.
know.
And it's kind of funny. We're watching a show and liking it about this lady who goes through the stones.
Yeah.
Aren't they like a very superstitious, like Scotland's very superstitious about all that kind of stuff?
Mhm.
Right,
Yeah.
right, and I think at that moment when, I know we're over time, but, it was such a cringe-worthy moment for me when Claire had to tell Jamie her story. I was like, oh no.
I'm like, he's
And
gonna
he
be
was
like,
just like, yeah,
okay,
okay.
sounds good.
I'm like, wow, he's such a good
Sure.
guy.
Oh,
Yeah. Yeah. Any other questions,
Comments,
concerns,
thoughts?
thoughts? We're good?
Thank you, everyone, for
Yeah.
joining us through this first
Run through.
run through of kind of, you
You
know.
guys did a great job.
Oh, thank you so much. I feel like we need to bring
Gonna
it
do it
back though.
again?